In this photo editing tutorial, we're going to take this photograph here and transform it into this using nothing other than my favorite photo editing tool, which is curves. This video that I'm sharing here on YouTube was chosen by you guys, and it comes straight from my Mastering Luminar Neo photo editing course. And if you're wanting to level up your photo editing skills in 2025, we're currently running a 25% discount. You can check out the link and that code in the description below. Oh, and by the way, if you've ever stared at your photo and thought, I don't know what tool to be applying, when, or why I should even be applying certain tools, stick around to the end because I've got a valuable point about how you can actually tackle and assess your photo so that you actually know what you're going to be applying next. So even though we're using curves all the way through, there's a logical approach as to what I'm doing with each application of that tool. All right, with that being said, let's get into it. Before I get into curves, I've just applied a foundational edit to my photo, something very simple. I've just lifted up the shadows and dropped down those highlights and made sure that my exposure is correct before I begin. Once that is all in place, let's get into this full edit. So this is going to be interesting, trying to edit this whole photo with curves only. So what do we want to do? Well, I'd like to bring attention maybe to the tree here, maybe the light kissing the grass on this area here. I think that's quite interesting. And I wouldn't mind trying to add some separation between the different layers of the hill as well. So these are all things that we can do with curves. I might also work with the color grade to intensify the yellowy orange over here and balance it out with some cooler colors in the shadow. We'll see how this progresses. So as you know, the first thing I like to do with curves is make sure that I have a pure white point and a pure black point. So I'm just going to do that now. And the presence of the red and the blue pixels tells me that everything's in order there. We have a black and a white point. I'll close that down and we're going to go with another curves tool. When I'm doing these kind of adjustments, what I like to do is try and get the most bang for my buck early on and then come in with the more detailed stuff afterwards. So if I look at the before and after of this, I mean, that's a pretty nice global adjustment. It's probably overcooking the sky a little bit. I want to keep that a bit darker, but I certainly like what it's doing through the land here. So I'm going to come in with my masking and use my brush. My brush is my favorite mask tool. You know, we've got some amazing masking tools, AI-driven stuff in Luminar. Yet I still find myself going back to the brush over and over again. It's just really nice for fine-tuning things, and I feel more of an artist while I'm doing it. Here's before, here's our after at the moment. All right, so we're making some pretty good progress already. Okay, how about we try and add some detail to this main tree formation right here? And I'm going to do that by adding some contrast. So let's put a point to represent the highlights and bring those up. And in terms of the shadows, do you know what? I'm going to lift those a little bit as well, because those shadows were so dark previously. I think adding more information into those shadows, that can only be a good thing. Now, I was focused on these trees while I was making that adjustment. And if we just look at the tree with the before and after, this looks pretty solid. But as soon as I zoom out and then we do our before and after, you can see how it's been detrimental to so many other areas of the photo. So of course, that's where our masking comes in. Now, if you're thinking, oh, probably the best thing to do for that tree, because it's quite precise, would be to come in with my object select AI, come in, hope that it can locate the tree, click on that, you know, and then we could erase this bit if we want. If that is your approach, don't. As you can see, we've got some serious haloing going on. It's so abrupt, and it's just not precise enough to isolate every single leaf of the tree. You're going to end up with haloing. There's no way around that. So what I'm going to do is actually just clear that mask, and then I'm going to come to my brush and I'm going to start painting it in with a really big brush with a really high amount of softness. The strength I'm going to keep pretty low, because if I went wholeheartedly all in on that, again, it's just going to be a little bit too much. So when I'm painting like this, what I'm thinking about is that haloing effect that could be possible if I was too abrupt with this. So I'm trying to add it in, but do it with more subtlety. So by letting it bleed over into other elements, that transition from where I'm applying it right the way out into the hillside and everything, if we can make that transition as smooth as possible, then it's much less noticeable that we've put a localized edit on that. And then I could come in with a bit more emphasis just in the centralized part of those trees there, where it's a little bit darker. So here's our before and our after, before and after. And even when you try to be as feathered with your approach as that, you still can get a little bit of haloing if you're not careful. And that's where you can just switch to the erase mode And I feel like just this little area of the hillside here is just getting a little bit too light. So we can come in and just try and erase the effect, that brightening effect we created with the curve, just erase it a little bit. All right, how about we try and create a bit more pop in the sky, just a bit of differential between the clouds and that blue in the background. Let's see whether we can achieve that with curves as well. So I'm just going to put a point on there. I know that that sky will be approximately in the midtones. And as I bring that down, you can see from the curvature of the curve that in those midtones and highlights where the clouds and the sky exists, we're starting to set the angle of the line more towards vertical than that 45° it was originally. And as I said to you before in the previous lessons, the more that approaches vertical, the more contrast you're going to get. So let's use some of that contrast in the sky. I'll just ease it off a little bit. And one thing to be mindful of is you can see how it's affected the hillside here and made that very dark indeed. My intention isn't to actually put any of that over the hillside. I just want to keep it in the sky. But just in case during the course of my masking, I do go over this hillside here, I want to make sure I'm not really darkening that down. So the way I would do that is just put a point on the bottom side of the curve that represents the shadows and just sort of lift that up. And now I get the best of both worlds in terms of contrast in the sky, and I'm not really darkening down the hillside too much. Overall, this looks pretty awful at the moment applied globally to our photo. But one of the things I'd recommend you do when you're getting into photo editing like this, you just want to train your eye to be looking only at the area where you intend to apply that effect. And so now I know that the sky is how I want it, I'm just going to come in with a linear gradient and pull that down so it kind of feathers in from the top of the sky and fades out as it goes into the rest of the photo. So here's our before and our after. Before and after is pretty subtle, but I hope you can agree that that is an improvement for the top part of the sky. One thing I'd like to do with this photo is really keep people's attention more in the central part of the frame and not let their eye escape off to the sides. I don't mind that we have a very bright area over here where the sun is just out of frame, but over on the left-hand side here, I don't want the brightness level right here to be so similar to the brightness in the middle of the photo that people's eye can easily be just meandering along this bit and then disappear out of the side of our frame. And so something that can help with that is just darkening that down. You know, that's what a vignette does effectively. It darkens the edge of all the frame so that your eye stays in the central point. However, a vignette isn't really going to work for us here because it's going to darken down where the sun is, and that's just not going to make any sense whatsoever. So again, curves are our friend. They can allow us to do that, and then we can paint that in with pinpoint precision. So let's do that. Let's come into the develop tool. And if you're thinking, okay, let's just put a point in the midtones and bring that down. That's going to darken that all down, and then we can paint it in and everything's going to look hunky-dory. Well, you'd be wrong, unfortunately. So let's crank the strength up a little bit. Come into our paint mode, make sure we have a nice big brush. And just to demonstrate, I'm going to paint that just on that side bit there, maybe a little bit around the front and also down the bottom here. Same sort of thing going on down here. It's very bright and our eye can disappear. So the problem with what we've done, if I look at the before and after, yes, we've definitely darkened that down, helping to keep our eye more in the central part of the frame. But you'll notice that by doing what we have, we've also increased the saturation of the colors before and after. We darkened it down, but we also added contrast. And of course, that's what we've done because we've increased the gradient of this line. And as I've said many times, the more we go towards a vertical, the higher the contrast value that we're adding. So how are we going to darken this down yet not introduce contrast? Well, quite easy, right? All we need to do, rather than grabbing a point in the middle, we're just going to grab a point for the whites and bring that down. And that will have darkened everything down, but not increased contrast. We've gone to a flatter line here. So here's our before and our after. You can see we've darkened, but we haven't affected the color in the same way. But one thing my eye is picking up on, and I'm not sure if it's just an illusion or whether this is really happening, but it appears that as we've darkened those down, I'm seeing less green and more of a kind of orangey tinge. It's almost like the color has changed, which logically it shouldn't have done. But if that's how it looks to my eye, then that's how it's going to look to my viewer's eye. So let's see if we can correct that as well with curves. We want to work on the same curve, to do that because we're talking into those areas that we've just masked. So I'm going to come to the green channel and I'm just going to see whether lifting this up, I can't get a bit more balance back into that color. Before and after, before and after. Now it looks like we've darkened it down and we've kept the color the same. Okay, I think I'm going to add a little bit of subtle fog just over the headland here. Of course, we want to come into Atmosphere AI, right? No, we're just going to stick with the curves tool. It can do everything. Right, so let's come into the luminosity section. And what does fog do? It decreases contrast, right? So if I lift this up, so we're getting rid of the black point, we're brightening that up and we're reducing contrast. So let's do that. Let's reduce contrast. Check. I was going to check the before and after, but I've misclicked and closed it down. No worries. It's moved to the edit stack. Before and after, before and after. Come into the masking, grab a brush, very low strength for this one. And currently my brush is way too big. So let's bring the size of that down, click, and I'm just going to run my mouse along the part where the headland meets the water. Maybe build it up just a little bit more in the bit where the headland folds in on itself. And let's just toggle the before and after. That is super subtle, but it's those little subtleties that can really help to elevate our edits. Effectively, we are creating our own atmospheric perspective just by adding in that little bit of fog. All right, what else do we need to do? I'm thinking we could create some kind of sun bleed coming from here just to give a warm, inviting feel. So again, we're going to come into curves. And to do this, it's probably going to be a two-step approach, a brightening effect and a color adjustment. I'm going to warm up that color so it represents warm sunlight. So the first thing I'm going to do is do that brightening. So I'm just going to work with the midtones in this. I want to make sure that I'm not overexposing those highlights. So we'll put a point just to control those. And I'm always toggling before and after to check that I'm happy with what I'm creating. Maybe we've gone a little too bright. I like to keep things a little subtle where I can. And now I'm just going to increase the reds just ever so slightly. Probably do the same with the greens as well. Red plus green equals our orangey yellows. And then in the blues, what I can do is pull away the very brightest pixels. And as we looked at in a previous lesson, when I do that, we can actually color tone the white pixels. I certainly don't want to be that extreme with it. I just want to do this with a little bit of subtlety. Toggle the before and after. Well, that's our overall before and after. I meant to do that with the tool. Before and after, before and after. And now what we can do is use a radial gradient to let this effect bleed in from over on the right-hand side of the frame into the whole photo. But what I want to do is make sure I don't let this effect get too big that I can't actually grab the control handles anymore. I'll keep the center part of the effect quite small, quite tight, and then we can have a larger transition zone, a larger fall off. And I've found that by using radial gradients in that way, we get the smoothest fall off. It's much harder to do this sort of effect with a brush and painting it in. This is going to look much more believable. All right, so I'm going to hop out of this and hopefully we've created a nice subtle fade of light from that right-hand side. So let's have a look at our before and after and look at the fade of that light. Before and after, before and after. I feel like I may have gone a little too heavy-handed with that. I'm brightening everything up, but in fact, we could actually bring this down and add more contrast. That is an option, but let's see, before and after. Yeah, pretty subtle. Look, I'm going to go with that. All right, let's try and craft a bit more global contrast into the center of the frame. That's where I want people to look, and I feel like we are just losing a little bit of contrast there. So let's work on that. Let's work on the contrast and then mask it in. To add contrast into this sort of area here, I know that that's around the shadows or just above, so it's not quite into the midtones. So I know as long as I can get more gradient in that line around that part of the image, the more gradient we get in that zone, the more contrast we'll get in that part of the image. And by pinning down this brightness point, it means we're not introducing excessive unwanted brightness elsewhere in the photo. Let's toggle the before and after. You can see that we're definitely introducing contrast in and around this central part of the frame. So with a brush set to about 1/3, let's just paint this effect in. I like to do it in passes because I can just sort of apply some, let go, see what I like, before and after, see where I want to add more of that effect, before and after. And then if I want to add even more, before and after, I can do that. At the same time, we want to bring attention to the center of the frame. I want to detract attention from around the edge of the frame. One way to do that is to darken things down, but already if you look at the pixels, they are very, very dark around this part of the frame. While I want to keep that dark, I feel like there's too much contrast. So what I'm going to do is apply another curves adjustment, surprise, surprise. Yet what I'm going to do is actually just reduce contrast overall around the edge of the frame. But I'm also going to lift that black point up as well, perhaps not quite as aggressively as I have done. This is a really extreme effect I've created at the moment. So I'm going to paint this in, but I'm going to do it with a low strength, and I'm certainly not going to build it back up to 100%. I'm just going to work with what I've got in light passes. So I'll increase the brush size, and I'm just going to do little bits at a time. I'm even going to come up to the clouds here as well. And I'm going to create an almost C-shaped mask to apply this effect. And it's almost like it's going to cup our viewer's eye in the brighter part of the frame. Let's have a little toggle of where we've come from and where we've got to, before and after, before and after. And let's go right back to the beginning, before and after, before and after. You know, we're really finessing this edit, and as you can see, it's just being done with curves. I'm kind of torn right now whether or not I should cheat, because the quick way to solve the problem that I feel we've got, which is the greens are too vibrant, the quick way would be to apply a color tool and just desaturate the greens. But we're working exclusively with curves, and I'm trying to show you that there's so much we can do with curves. So I guess the takeaway with that is, yes, curves can do a lot for us. They're super powerful, but they're not the be all and end all, and they should be used in conjunction with the other tools inside Luminar Neo to get the exact look and effect that we're after. But this is all about curves, so I am going to show you how we can minimize that green using curves only. Right, only use curves. Stupid self-imposed rule. Okay, let me show you how we could tackle this using curves. So I find the saturation is too much in the greens. So what I'm going to do first of all is actually select the greens, and we can do that with the color selection. And then I'm going to come in and find the most representative place to click. And we'll just go with that for now, and we'll come back to our adjustments, and now we're going to see the changes that we make appear only where we made that selection. So if I bring this all the way up, so we see pure white, you can see the areas we're dealing with. So if you recall, if we flatten this line out, we are reducing contrast, and reducing contrast pushes things towards a gray, and grey has no colour. Therefore, we can reduce the colour of the green by manipulating that line towards a straight. But I don't want to remove the colour completely, I just want to minimise it. If I keep the central point running through the 45-degree line, I know that I'm not changing the brightness value, I'm just changing the colour. So before and after, we've reduced the colour. I'm definitely going to need to finesse this mask, but you get the idea at the moment. And now if we want to, we can take some of that green away by pulling this down. Obviously, I pull green down, it adds magenta. But if we take it down just a tiny, tiny amount and just take out a little bit of that green before and after, I don't want any of that effect anywhere apart from just on this middle ground through here. And I don't want it with the strength that we've got it going on at the moment either. So I'm just going to reduce the amount and toggle the before and after. As you can see, we can control the color in our photos using curves, but as I just said before, it's not really the ideal approach. So come on, give me a bit of a pass on this one. I'm going to go into the correct tool to deal with this, which is the color tool. We're going to come in and drop the saturation of the greens and the yellows. And I'm also going to do one of my favorite things, which is shift the green color more towards a yellow. Let's have a look at what we've done there. Before and after, before and after. Yeah, we've just minimized those greens. And now I'm going to carry on with the curves. I think just a nice overall contrast curve could look really nice before we move on to a final color grade on this. I'm actually going to lift the black point up just a little bit, because sometimes I feel like just lifting the darkest pixels away from a pure black can actually just help to give our photos a little something, a little kind of quality about it that I really like. And let's make sure we still have a nice amount of contrast in there like that, before and after, and maybe a bit more brightness through the center of the frame. So I'll just brush in a bit of brightness through here. Again, work into that kind of C shape that we created before and after. Yeah, a bit more brightness. And now we can actually do that final color grade. How about we try the drop in the blues? So we're introducing yellow into the highlights. I mean, that looks really lovely and warm, right? But shall we balance that by the addition of some cool blues in the shadow? Yeah, I don't mind that. How about we warm this up a little bit by the addition of some red? So let's just be quite subtle with that. Before and after, before and after. Now, if you like the color grade that you created, so here it is here, but you feel it's a little strong. I showed you in the previous lesson how we can create a separate layer to control that, but let me show you another method using masking. We've looked at this technique briefly before, but let me show you one more time. We're going to reduce the softness to 0 so we can get this done quickly. What we need to do is use the strength slider to set the amount that we want to see this. So for example, if you kind of felt like, I like this, but I only want 60% of it, you would set the strength of your brush to 60%, and then you're just going to paint over the entire image. And you can do that very quickly once you've set that to 400. And now you can see before and after, we have that exact color grade, yet it's masked in with 60%. So we're only getting 60% of that color grade effect that we created. And now it's time for my favorite bit, which is our initial before versus our curves only edit after. Before and after. Before and after. And let's just jump into the edit stack so we can quickly see all of those curves adjustments that we made along the way. So they all play into the fact that this image went from this to this. So my approach with curves is this, and I recommend you sort of adopt the same approach. It's identify a problem in your image, something that you're not happy with and you want to change, whether that's needing to add contrast or reduce contrast. You know, it's a continual process of identifying a problem in the image, creating a curve that solves that problem, and then masking the curve in only where you want it. And by doing that and just working through piece by piece by piece, your edit will evolve very organically. And at the end, hopefully, you'll have something that you like the look of. I really hope that this landscape edit using nothing more than curves has been useful to you, but if at any point you felt like things were a little bit too advanced or I didn't cover any aspect in enough depth, just remember this is a masterclass that was part of that course that I mentioned earlier, and we lead up to that. So if you don't understand curves and want a more in-depth explanation of all of those techniques and how you manipulate the curves to get particular looks, I would strongly recommend you check out the course, because that's where I elaborate on all of that stuff. This video was the culmination of all of that knowledge that we build up to that will be yours if you follow along with the course. So currently there's that 25% discount if you do want to get hold of it. If you just want to keep learning from me off of YouTube, that's all good. I'll keep creating some new content through 2025. I just want to say it's really good to be back, and I'm excited about the year ahead. So I'll see you in the next video, or in the course perhaps. Okay, I'll catch you later. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye for now.